right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's what we're doing with, all pharmaceuticals. Oh, well, the side effects are too bad. Here, try another one. Again, what do you want for a field that's essentially 150 years old? All right, so this is an old definition of the old ASAM definition of alcoholism. Alcoholism is that primary means nothing else causes it. Chronic, it happens over time, chronic disease, with genetic, psychosocial, and environmental factors influencing its development and manifestation. So there's a genetic component, we've already talked about that. Psychosocial, so the way you think, and social pressures, and environmental factors influencing its development and manifestation. The disease is often progressive. That means it gets worse if untreated over time, and fatal. It is characterized by any or all of these: continuous or periodic impaired control over drinking, preoccupation with the drug alcohol, use of alcohol despite adverse consequences, and distortions in thinking, most notably denial. Been a couple upgrades, but it's just, it works as a definition.
You carry a card that says that.
No, it's easy to memorize, actually.
No, I'm like,
Yeah.
there's plenty of people here. This is
Yeah.
the problem.
Right. All right. So denial is a component of addictive. Yeah.
I was trying to write that down because my paper's black.
Oh,
Yeah, when I put it,
set your printer to black and white.
I did.
You did.
It turned all the colored ones that are colored
Yeah.
black.
Oh.
Yes, to make sure it's printed on.
Okay. I'm gonna have to change the slides. Oh, okay.
I printed it color. Did you try color?
Okay.
I like black and white, it looks pretty good, but
All right.
this one's a grayscale that makes it turn out black.
Okay.
Like gray.
All right. Yeah, see the problem with, I have to do these slides so they work on television, for the television signal, the contrast. So that's different for printing. Let me know when you got it.
Just do it as fast as I can.
So also notice how this kind of dovetails with that definition from DSM. They do talk to each other.
So if one of your parents is like full-blown alcoholic, like your chances are way higher.
It's not destiny, but yes. All you're inheriting is all you are inheriting is their potential tolerance. Okay? And the way it works, and this is why I did that whole slide about epigenetics, from a quantum point of view, you basically reprogram your DNA every day with new experiences. Okay? Simultaneously, it's like it's an upgrade with all your experiences. So it's basically up to, depending on which parent it is, the sperm cells are upgraded and the eggs are upgraded up until the moment of conception and then birth when you become separated.
So if like your parents are alcoholics, both of them,
Yeah.
and you avoid that throughout your life and you are not an alcoholic,
Right.
and you're constantly changing your DNA, so if you have children, they have a greater potential of not being an alcoholic as well?
Well, I wish it were that easy.
Okay.
I wish it were that easy, because often what happens is you'll inherit your grandparents' tolerance, and your parents might not drink because they didn't want to turn out the way their parents were. So you inherit your grandparents' tolerance. Okay, because also what happens is, and this is what they noticed with the Scandinavian twins. Okay, how are they developing alcoholism if it's not in their environment? Okay, well, it must be their genes. So we often see this where when they talk about alcoholism skipping generations, okay, there's a non-using generation often, and they're not going to tell their kids about drinking because there's a whole shame piece along with that. They're not going to talk about it. And the kid will inherit the tolerance of the grandparents, even though the parents are not using. Yeah.
Probably sharing all that information with the next generation would be best.
Yes. Right. In prevention, we do that. Basically talking about that. Clear? Ready to move? Okay. So for example then, denial is a component of addictive systems. It's a complex of beliefs and attitudes which revolve around the sincere delusion that there is no problem and that there's nothing wrong with the way things are. And if there is a problem, it's with you as an individual or as a marginalized group who won't or can't fit into the quote-unquote normal, healthy system. Those things are in quotes because you can have an alcoholic system that thinks that the non-alcoholic is the problem. Or I'm drinking because of you, or any number of things. So denial is a major impediment to recovery in both the addict and codependent. In the addict, denial supports continued supply. In the codependent, denial supports enabling the addict's continued addiction. And there can be a really sick dynamic where the codependent doesn't really want the addict to get healthy because then they don't need them anymore. Some people need to be needed, which is a sure sign of codependency within these kind of systems. So most enabling, so denial basically, denial that there's a problem, and like the river Nile, it is a river that runs long and deep. And most enabling behavior is done out of love, caring, or desire to help, in effect, shielding the addict or alcoholic from the natural consequences of their behavior. Some examples of that, basically a spouse calling in sick for the using spouse, coach ignoring signs of excessive use in top players, principal reducing penalties for first time use for good kids. That is, usually by the time somebody notices in a particular system, the behavior's been going on for a long time. And good kids are just kids that you like. Not the actual source of the problem. And then this was one that we used to hear a lot, maybe still do. Belief that the drug problem began in the 60s, product of liberalism, and is not a problem of mainstream America. I think we've pretty much destroyed that one, hopefully. But, you know, like when I said the other day, or when I've said before, you know, George W. Bush was fetal alcohol spectrum disorder because Barbara drunk during his pregnancy. So he has some cognitive deficits. There's no way around that. He doesn't have the classic FAS face, but he definitely has some cognitive deficits, some things that are not connecting. Can still run a country with help, right? So there's that. But when I've heard things like the joke about the two Daves quote, or two Daves joke that I talked about, where two different Daves, one of them was the then Attorney General of this state, and another was a prominent drug researcher, and they used the same joke. When I was in high school, the only people that used drugs were jazz musicians and people south of the border. So whatever, 1950s Medford, I'm not going to believe there's Mexican black people in Medford dealing drugs to the white kids, even if, especially if there's sundown laws in Medford. I ain't gonna buy that. Nice try. But, you know, people want to, oh, well, it's the 60s, it's the liberal hippies. Right. That ain't working. That doesn't explain certain people. All right. So now another level of denial is the belief that a medical condition, because essentially addiction is a medical condition, particularly if it's an ingestive addiction, that it can be cured by incarceration. All right. So from a public health perspective, public health concerns itself with preventing disease in populations. So for example, just as your physician treats you, the Surgeon General treats the American people, and the World Health Organization of the United Nations treats the world. So that's part of the public health community. So public health uses science, advocacy, and politics to improve the health of large populations of people. So for example, the fact that you have iodine in your salt and you actually don't have a choice about that, chlorine in your water, vitamins in your milk, seat belts, helmet laws, the drinking age, smoking age, safety codes, certain medical practices like universal precautions, all those are public health initiatives, so they're all around you. So often one of the things that we've done in the field is move from a simple 12-step base to looking at, all right, we need to use the science, the medical community, and a public health approach. So part of that approach is using data, as I've talked about in other places. So alcohol and other drug use data sets. So the household survey, which is voluntary adult phone survey, the core survey, college students. Henry Wexler at Harvard's his binge drinking study, where he basically looks specifically at binge drinking among college students and tracks that as an indicator. Monitoring the Future, which is the K-12 study, and there's also targeted schools, that targets schools, some in Oregon, and the state of Oregon does its own study of targeted schools too, for drug use. And Weekly Reader and other surveys like that. Pride, the parents group. All right, so data does not always tell you how and where to act. So you could start at the beginning before the problem starts. So as an example, within prevention, we look at a triangle of primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. And part of this triangle is host, agent, and environment. This inside of public health is called the environmental model. Outside of public health, it's called the public health model. But it's disease prevention, basically. All right? So if you pick a disease, let's say malaria. The host is the human who lives near a swamp. The agent is the mosquitoes. And the environment is where these two get together. So you could spray the mosquitoes, you could drain the swamp, or you could inoculate the human. Okay? With drugs and alcohol, okay, the host is the potential addict or alcoholic or person in a relationship with them. The agent is the drug seller. So in law enforcement, they talk about interdicting the agent or drug suppression or those kind of strategies. And the environment is the policy environment. What are the laws, norms, and all those things? So for example, those of you who did the drug survey, the survey that you could have done along with the social recon or instead of, that's basically looking at an environmental approach. It's prevention, but it's tertiary. Right? So another level of prevention. So primary is before the problem starts. That's where you want to start. Oh, better to deal with the problem before it started. So that's primary prevention. Secondary prevention in a drug context is, okay, they've started to use, but they're not addicted yet. Let's drop them down to a lower level of risk. Tertiary could also be, okay, so secondary, if they've started using, try and prevent them from getting addicted, but if they are addictive, get them treatment. And then tertiary becomes recovery. If you get that example, right? So you can start at the beginning, going back to the slide before the problem starts. So where would that be? So data tells us, for example, if you got kids, take the kid's age and subtract 5 or 6. That gets you the grade level, assuming kid starts kindergarten at 5 or 6, right? So as an example, 16 minus 6 gives you 10th grade, roughly. And we can add, too. Take grade level, add 5 or 6, and that gives you the kid's age. Same idea, all right? The reason I'm saying this, right, is this. In prevention, the age of initiation is the first time a kid uses on their own. And this is where the behavioral environmental factor comes in strongest. Okay? I'm not talking about the kid going to get dad a beer during Super Bowl Sunday and taking a hit off it as they open it and walk back. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about kid stashing the alcohol and using on their own. Okay? So age of initiation, and you can basically spread that across all kinds of different behavior. First time you had sex. Well, what do you mean by sex? Okay. What is that? Bill Clinton notwithstanding. Age of initiation, depends on what the targeted behavior is. In terms of STI infection, basically, any mode that can get you infected. So, age of initiation. First time kid uses or engages in a health risky behavior on their own. So, when Oregon age of initiation was 10, and it's still about 10, the national initiation age was 7, according to a weekly reader survey in the 90s. Okay, so given the job that we've been doing, and I'm not putting down, obviously I've been part of that effort, so I'm not necessarily putting us down, but understanding we get outspent. The alcohol and just the alcohol advertising budget alone in the domestic United States is 10 times what is spent on all treatment and prevention. And that's the year 2000 stat. So we've been outspent for a while. It's probably not likely that we're going to raise the initiation age above 10, because I talked with somebody that tracks this stuff, it's still 10. Now, people are often shocked when I first came to this state in '83, dealing went down to kindergarten in LA Unified. So you can assume that first use is happening by then too, right? So in this Eugene schools, dealing was in middle school at the same time. Okay, and the age of initiation was 13 then, but quickly dropped by the 90s. All right, so that's a reality that we're dealing with. Where would prevention start? Before conception would be good, and I'm serious about that. In communities that call it particularly Native Americans, prevention starts before conception. Yeah.
So we should realistically be talking about these issues with our kids at an age as low as 7.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. If they can form the question and ask you about it, you should be able to talk about it.
And birth control.
That and birth control? Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, part of what just what I've been doing in my career working with the Fed. So this last piece here, prevention has been going down to preschool for 20 years. Oh, excuse me. 20 years at the time that I wrote that is the mid-70s. And that's true. Okay? So black folks in D.C. were doing drug prevention as part of Head Start in the mid-70s. Okay? So I'm just saying, when I'm working for the feds in Portland, and we're basically going to AMA Head Start, which is in Northeast Portland, mostly black churches, mixed race Head Start program, and we're doing a prevention program that's already 20 years old from DC in 1991. You do the math. Okay, so that seemed radical for some people at the time, but we were in the middle of a crack epidemic. And so when you have kids that can describe how to make crack, when you have kids that basically say, oh, my uncle was on cops, and the Head Start teacher asks, oh, your uncle's a cop? No, they got led away on cops. Right? So the kids are describing drug transactions and how to make crack as part of their families. And so that means if you're doing prevention in preschool with Head Start, the teachers need to be, one, cognizant of their issues, their own family issues, as well as what's going on with the kids. So if that was going on in 1991 in inner city Portland, what would have been happening at Eugene? You think? Were we looking at that in 1990? No. So I'm just saying. Data told us this, but not everybody's looking at the data. All right, so other addictions that Rasmussen talks about. We talk about process, poly, and common mentions with the Recovery Center: sex addiction, internet addictions, money issues, self-injury, abuse. The praxis, that is where theory and practice meet and interact. For practitioners, focuses on each thing or mode depending on what it is, but the mode is basically the same in terms of looking at how you deal with addictions. Addiction is a goal-oriented behavior. There's lots of different ways of meeting that goal, but the basic goal is brain reward. So a process can engage the nucleus accumbens in the same way, using the same neurotransmitters that an external substance does. All right, so a lot of times we engage in part of prevention, and the public health approach is harm reduction or abstinence. I like to reverse them. That is, go for abstinence first. But if they fail at abstinence, okay, we'll do harm reduction. If you get resistance to the abstinence, go with harm reduction, whatever that means for that particular substance or practice. So detox, that's the reason it's in quotes, it's returning to a new normal. And detox is in quotes because, look, if your problem is an eating disorder, you can't stop eating. Okay? So eating more healthy, so that's why in that personal addiction inventory, hey, try a week of raw foods. You'll definitely confront your Dorito addiction. I'm sorry. I know. They catch fire. Did you know that?
No.
They catch fire.
A lot of fried food is flammable.
It's fun at night. I'm not making that up. That's like the dropping your teeth or a nail in Coca-Cola for a week. It doesn't even take a week to dissolve it.
We had a guy, I worked in nursing homes, and we had a guy who had a Coca-Cola addiction, and he was drinking Diet Coke too. But one time he left, because we had certain caregivers on certain parts, and one lady didn't do a good job of cleaning, and Coca-Cola spilled. It never dried and got sticky, and it foamed up over a week. It was so gross.
This is no joke. Does anybody know what a nasal feeding tube is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. They are cleaned and said in documentation to clean it with Coke.
Yeah.
Coca-Cola soda.
Right.
That's,
Just like you
that's the
clean your
common
water.
practice.
Because of phosphoric acid, that's why. All right, so part of the practitioner praxis, all right? Whether it's harm reduction or abstinence, detox, you're basically trying to get them to a baseline where they can look at and identify unaddressed core emotional issues driving the addictive behavior. That's part of the science. Assuming that the goal of the addiction is basically to try and resolve some emotional issues that are driving them.
On that, how do you know what their emotional issues are?
A
whole survey and diagnostic, taking information intake type situation.
It basically consists of asking the right questions if you're in a diagnostic situation. Sometimes the drugs themselves will tell you what they're using. Okay, so as an example, if they're into opiates, actually, we'll get into practitioner practice that talks about this explicitly. But if they're opiates are painkillers. So, and they cause you to numb emotionally. So it's not just, they don't actually stop the pain. They basically make you not care about the pain. So you can focus on other things if you use it therapeutically. But if you abuse them, the numbing, again, it's not physiologically stopping the pain. It's making it so you don't care. Okay, so that's emotional numbing. So you look at, well, you're a heroin addict. How have you been abused? You're a meth addict. How are you angry? Where do you feel depressed? Is that depression a form of sublimated anger? How have you been abused as well? Okay, marijuana. Let's see. I'm medicating because I was angry when I was using that, right? So sometimes the drug itself will tell you, but they will also, if it's constructed correctly, they'll tell you those emotional issues.
I just would think alcohol would be more painstaking to get to the root of the problem because it covers a larger, broader umbrella.
With alcohol, basically you can have some of the same issues as the other things, and it's cheaper than the other things and more readily available than the other things. So that can be used as well. But alcohol also has the effect of, people get into trouble when they're drunk because the brakes for certain behavior come out, are stopped as a result of the drug. So they get combative, or they have explosive rages or things like that. Okay, which is then itself an indicator of a core emotional issue that needs to be addressed. Or question over here?
Is there no core emotional issue that would be related to cannabis use? Is it could be a number of things?
Could be a number of things.
Okay.
Yeah. So part of the practice is also changing their lifestyle to match new circumstances, building a life from scratch. Some questions that I ask often is, what's your life mission? Well, I want to help people like me. That's often a common one. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Is a question, getting to life mission. And how is your present activity helping that? I often talk about, what's your art? Getting them to write, getting them to draw. Keeping a dream journal. Keeping a journal.
That's not easy.
No, none of this is easy. But getting to, if you don't address the core emotional issues in treatment, in the time that you have them, in the format that you have them, it's difficult. Which is why, in terms of, where if I were changing treatment, I would basically up the intensity. And the way you would up the intensity is you basically address those core emotional issues like right up front with the first meeting. If you're not the one doing the intake. So, in my setting, I am. So relapse prevention and relapse management. We'll define recovery more fully later, but it's more than simple abstinence. It's also preparing them for, okay, you're under attack. So how do you defend yourself against, the random person that turns your no into no K, staying away from shaky persons, places, or things. Saying that, okay, yeah, relapse is predictable, but I'm not giving you permission to use. But here are some of the barriers that would keep you from remaining abstinent. So just like I was talking about with that guy, Mike. Okay, great. Your anger management training did keep you from breaking furniture, beating your wife, acting out in front of your kid, and you did $1,500 worth of damage to your car. That's a win. That's harm reduction. Okay? Because anger itself can be kind of like a drug too. And, this guy was a meth cook. So, now he therapeutically gets his training boxers and MMA fighters. Oh well. So, for example, teen drinking may cause irreversible brain damage. So this is looking at another aspect of prevention. Menthol may be nicotine's partner in addiction. Those two links there. The red specks, if you can see them, highlight where the integrity of the brain's white matter is significantly less in the teens who binge drink compared to those who are not. So basically what that's measuring is functionality. If this is a fMRI photo, it's not necessarily literally holes in the brain, but it's areas of missing functionality. The structure isn't there. There's no functionality. Okay, and this is brain damage to the brain of a teenage drinker. Teenage binge drinker. So that's one of the things that we track. Binge drinkers we might see. This is an old stat, so Henry Wexler or others could supply more recent data. But when we first tracked this, high school seniors binge drank at the rate of 28%, which is still 1 in 4. But when they got into their first year of college, any college, whether it was here or a U of O or 4-year school, it went up to 35%. So over 1/3, 1 in 3. So something about the environment of college supported heavier drinking, the perception. And, parenthetically, I'd mentioned that before Ronald Reagan, this is the nice thing that I'll say about Ronald Reagan. He essentially interrupted 800 consecutive years of non-attention to this issue in higher ed by instituting the modern prevention system in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. Previously, colleges and universities didn't think this was a problem. Copy that. Thank you. Yeah, so skip over this. So menthol is definitely addictive for various reasons from that particular article. The link is still there. So here's another food addiction piece. willpower and the slacker brain. This time you say to yourself, I will do 50 chin-ups every day, skip dessert, or call my mother every Friday. It's time to do those things that I know I really, really should do. And then you don't. So according to psychologist Richard Wiseman, 88% of all resolutions end in failure. These are his findings from an 2007 study in England that studied 3,000 people. How come people, so many attempts at willpower, lose both their will and their power, etc. So for example, this experiment, you memorize a string of numbers in one room, walk to another room, recite the numbers. Some get 2-digit numbers, others get 7-digit numbers. That's part of this number string that they're memorizing. In the hall between rooms, a woman offers them chocolate cake or fresh fruit salad as a snack. So you have an emotional brain and a rational brain, which are often in conflict, particularly with issues of addiction or habit change or whatever. Look at that.
I was thinking the same thing. Go.
Look at that. So moist, so tender. All right. So the rational system pushes you towards a healthier choice, fruit. The emotional system wants chocolate cake. Okay? Chocolate has 2 drugs in it, right? Sugar and theobromine, like caffeine. In combination, makes it more powerful than bananas. Okay? The rational system is given a task like 7 numbers to memorize. That's enough to derail the healthy decision. Implication for treatment is that you need to get to a core emotional issue whose healthy coping skill practice is stronger than the drive towards addictive behavior. Has to be powerful enough to want to do that. Theoretically, you would think it would be kids. Getting your kids back or keeping your kids from getting taken away. But some people, that's abstract, too abstract to them. Thanks. Obviously not if you're a mom, but sometimes with moms too.
My mom.
Yeah. So what would that be? So if your kids, your family, your job, your home, many of which people lose to the addiction, so what would that be? So that often becomes a question in terms of looking at what the core emotional issue would be. What is powerful enough to overcome that? Depends on the person. And that's where you individually explore that. They often come to common themes, but so as an example, then what is the source? Where is the center, the greatest pain that you're aware of, or that maybe you're not aware of, but it's still driving you because you can't acknowledge it yet because of denial? So it has a shape. And so part of the art within this is basically detecting what that is, even if they don't admit it. Okay? So usually what happens then, without getting to this core emotional issue, you'll have multiple treatment episodes and relapse right after. You get longer treatment, then relapse again. 3rd time's a charm, maybe, maybe not. I've met women whose core emotional issues was being emotionally abused, sexually abused, and never raised that issue in 3 treatment episodes. Even with women's treatment. So, varies with individuals, but definitely you have to get to a core emotional issue. All right, we'll continue on next week.
Is it possible to go your whole life in and out of treatment and never recover?
It's possible. People have done that.
Is it common?
It has happened more than once. So we're not surprised when it happens.